Hello everybody, Wild here. So it is finally time that I start doing a PHASER 3 tutorial, and what better way to start than making a Space Invaders clone. My first ever tutorial series was on making Space Invaders using PHASER 2, and I promised that I would redo the series in much higher quality. And now that PHASER 3 has matured enough, there isn't a better time than now. Before we start with the video, I would like to thank the supporter of this video. PHASER Editor is an amazing new editor which you can use to develop HTML5 games using the latest versions of PHASER. Things included are things such as a visual game level builder, smart code completion with PHASER, great documentation tools, and so much more. If you're interested in the PHASER Editor, there is a link in the description to my affiliate link. If you're interested and want to help the channel, go ahead and use that. So enough talking, let's actually get started with this. So the first thing we need to do is download PHASER, so go to the PHASER website and download the latest version. Once you have it downloaded, go ahead and put it in your projects folder. So once you have your PHASER file inside of your projects folder, we can go ahead and make another folder and call it assets. Now we're going to need an index file to hold all of our code, so let me add this. We'll call it index.html. That's the standard way of naming the main file. So in our index.html file is where we are going to be holding all of the code for our game. But first of all, we need to add some boilerplate code for our browser. So the first thing we need to do is tell the browser that we are using HTML5. So the way to do that is just to say doctype HTML. And in here we also need to add our HTML tags. I'm going to open that there and close it here. Then we also need our head tag and close it down here. And now we need to specify the character encoding for the browser. We are going to be using Unicode, so we'll do that by saying meta charset and set it to UTF-8. There are a bunch of other encodings that you could use, but you usually want to use Unicode so that you don't get any random errors when you're trying to use unsupported characters. So now what we need is a title for our page. We're going to say Space Invaders, because that is the game that we are making. So the next thing to do is include our PHASER file. So the way we can do that is say script source, and then we need to point to the PHASER file. So we'll do phaser.js, because that is what it's called in our folder. And then we also need to close that tag. Actually, there's one thing I missed. You always want to include your PHASER file before you include any other files. So if you have any other JS files, such as classes or prototypes, make sure they are included after you include the phaser.js file. So now what we need is an area where we can write the code for the actual game. So we need to open up a body tag and close that there. And in here we want to specify a script. So script type text JavaScript. So what we are doing here, we are just creating a script inside the index.html file. So when you have a bigger project, you would want to split your files and have multiple files to keep everything organized. But for the sake of this tutorial and keeping it simple, we are going to include all of our code in the index file. So in here we're going to be writing all of the code that we need. So the first thing PHASER needs is some kind of a config object where we can specify things such as the width, the height, and the renderer, and also a bunch of other things that you'll come across later. But for now we're going to keep it really simple. We're going to create a config object, and let's specify the render context that we are going to be using. So the way we do that is say type and then phaser.auto. So there are actually three ways of passing in a rendering context. We can do phaser.auto, which automatically sets a renderer based on the browser's compatibility, but we can also manually set it. So we can do phaser.canvas if we want to use the canvas rendering context. We can use WebGL if we want to use WebGL. So what auto does is it tries to use WebGL at first, and if the browser is not compatible with WebGL, it will fall back to canvas. And that's what we want. We are going to be using PHASER.auto, and then we want to specify the width and a height for the game. We're going to do 800 by 600, so height would be 600. So what we need now is to pass in the functions that the scene should be using. PHASER uses a scene system where there's basically 3 functions. There are more, but we are just going to be using 3. There are 3 that you need to use. I'll explain them right now. Let's just create a scene object. So in here we need to tell PHASER what those needed functions are in our code, right? So there are 3 functions in PHASER that you need to have. There is a preload function, there is a create function, and there is an update function. So preload, we are going to be creating a function called preload, so we'll set it to that. Then we want a create function. We'll create one called create, and there is the last one, which is update. We're going to set it to update. These are all functions that we are going to be creating later, but these are the 3 functions you basically need. The preload function, all that does is it loads in the assets into your game, into cache. And then in create, what that basically does is it sets up those objects that you have created. And in our update, we can update those objects. So now we need to actually make these functions, but first of all we need to create our game object that PHASER needs. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say here var game. I'm going to set it to a new PHASER.game, and we need to pass in the config through there. And in PHASER 2 you would need to set this game variable to be global so that you can access all the subsystems that PHASER has. But in PHASER 3 that is not the case anymore. You can just use the scenes themselves to access the subsystems, which is really cool. But yeah, for now we need to create these functions. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to need our preload function, so let's say function preload. Open that up. And now we need our create function, so function create. And now we need our update function, so function update. So that's basically all that we need in order to get our game running. So let's just have a look again. We have opened up our HTML document. We have set a title, invaders. Whoops. We have included PHASER, and we also have our own script here, which holds our code for the game. We have a config. Don't forget the semicolons. And we also have our game. We have our game variable here. We also have our functions that the game will be running on. To actually run our game, we need a web server. I recommend getting Phoenix. I find it to be the easiest program to work with in order to get a web server running. Once you have downloaded it, go ahead and create a web server with the path leading to our projects directory. So now if we go into Phoenix and actually open up our project, you should have a black rectangle, and if you press F12 on Chrome and the console comes up, you should have no errors. And once you have that, you are ready to go on to the next episode. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you are interested in more game dev related content, please subscribe to my channel, and we will see each other next time. Goodbye.